Amen. I mentioned at the start of this service how challenging it's been for me, and I know so many more of us, to stop watching the images of the heinous attack on our Capitol that took place this week. The pictures and the videos of the mob's criminal behavior are continuing to be on the news, and there's a part of me that is compelled to view them again and again, even though doing so triggers within me the combination of shock, anger, and sadness that I've been experiencing since the event happened. The vile actions of this violent mob need to be repudiated and the perpetrators punished for their crimes. And the people who committed this desecration should never have gotten close to the Capitol. There was a massive failure in security that led to this debacle, and I am disturbed that the video of these few thousand individuals have captured the attention of billions around the world. They are not worth it. I don't think that the mob and their vandalism deserves any more airtime, at least in my brain. But I do think it is worth investigating some of the larger societal dynamics that Wednesday's events are connected to. In particular, the comfort too many of us have in fighting instead of constructively dialoguing, and destroying instead of building. Pick your commentator, be they left, right, or center. There is a broad agreement that too much of America, be they our elected officials or our neighbors, are polarized from one another, and that we are more ready to fight rather than speak sensitively and sensibly. This all too common default of aggressive conflict and destruction is not new, and it isn't American. It's part of our humanity, especially when we are vulnerable or under stress or attack. It takes much more mental focus and energy to engage in a thoughtful conversation than it does to lash out at a perceived threat. Much more emotional satisfaction, at least in the short term, comes from breaking a window than carefully and slowly building a bridge with someone who is philosophically miles apart. Now, I'm not looking to make excuses for anyone or anyone's inappropriate behavior and the disturbing trends of polarization in our nation. I am, though, attempting to understand and address it. Our Torah is one of our primary lenses for reflecting on the world we live in and for guiding us in how we might engage with friends and strangers alike. These days, we need our tradition's wisdom more than ever. This Shabbat, we begin a new book of the Torah, Exodus, the second book. Genesis, the first, is often described as a book about family, our family, the first generations of the Jewish people in all their often dysfunctional glory. Exodus is where we rather instantly become a people, a nation, the Israelites. It is where we earn our freedom from slavery and set forth on a new path with laws of our own designed to help our ancestors and all the generations that follow exist and contribute to a society, a nation that strives towards Judaism's and humanity's highest values: kindness, justice, compassion, and love, just to name a few. Like Genesis, though, Exodus contains many challenges we humans face. The Egyptians, especially Pharaoh, are brutal. Today's portion notes that they had forgotten the heroism of Joseph. How could they have done it? We just read about him last week, and the partnership between Joseph and the good Pharaoh of old who invited all of Joseph's family to live in Egypt. Over time, knowledge of this history faded, and the strangers, the Hebrews, were seen as a threat and were eventually enslaved, dehumanized, and monetized. This is the predicament we find our ancestors in at the start of the second book of the Torah. The Israelites have a problem of their own, as a slave mentality has taken over their consciousness. They lack courage and are too scared to think for themselves. Even when Moses arrives with God's help to free them, they complain and curse Moses and God. Oy. And spoiler alert here, later in Exodus, throughout the Torah too, you find our ancestors complaining more and whining more and underwhelming. It is as if our sacred Torah is shouting at us and all humanity from each chapter, saying, you're going to have to really put in some effort to attain these standards we have here, folks. It just won't happen magically. In fact, without a deep commitment to these core values, you could be in big trouble. The Israelites wrestle with their negative and destructive nature time and time again in the Torah. One could explain why they are this way. They're scared, they're former slaves, they're immature, but that doesn't justify their behavior. It is not a pretty sight. One sad example, after the 10th plague results in Pharaoh freeing the Israelites, they stand at the edge of the Red Sea, free for the first time in hundreds of years. But Pharaoh has a change of heart and sends his army to recapture the Israelites. When our ancestors hear in the far distance the coming roar of Pharaoh's army, what is recorded in the Torah? Is it the charge to bear arms and beat back their former abusers? Nope. Instead, one of the first ever recorded words of sarcasm are sounded by our people. They say to Moses, was it for the want of graves in Egypt that we have come to the desert to die? Really? After all Moses and God had done for the people, they turn on them? Really? And there's more. After the miracle of the splitting of the Red Sea and the obliteration of the Egyptian army in its wake, the people, really free now, really safe now, are thirsty. Do they rally together to help figure out a water rationing system to get them through these early days in the wilderness? Nope. They rail against Moses and God. Are you noticing a theme here? Yes, there are many well-behaved Israelites and moments of noble behavior in our Torah, but they are mixed in constantly with many of these examples of unproductive, kvetching, divisiveness, and rebellion. Now, frankly, I don't usually emphasize all the convoluted behavior within the Torah because our tradition is so filled with inspiring characters and important mitzvot that it's easy for me to focus on the positive. But this week, I cannot ignore the reality of this narrative within our most sacred book. Our Torah captures a timeless human challenge. We have to work hard to take care of each other, to look positively towards the future and retain hope. We have to work hard and choose not to dwell on the pain of the past and not to rip each other to shreds. We have to work hard to focus on building instead of giving into the urge to tear down. Recent modern history, thank goodness, has heroes who have modeled this behavior, among them the Reverend and Dr. Martin Luther King, who will celebrate next week at Shabbat services, a man who had been beaten, abused, a man who had witnessed the worst of mankind. Despite all of this, Dr. King continued to preach nonviolence and hope, stating in one sermon, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair the stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. And Nelson Mandela, who instead of seeking revenge for the 27 years of wrongful imprisonment and torture, sought to move his nation out of apartheid forward into a bright new day. He famously said, "Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies." And then there was Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Rabin, both who in their own days as Israel's prime minister stated that the time for war was over and that the time to engage in the hard work of making peace was now. Our tradition clearly states that we don't have to be a king or a Mandela or a Rabin. Each of us has the power to be a Rodef Shalom. This is Hebrew for a pursuer of peace, Hebrew for a pursuer of wholeness. We are each to be a Rodef, an ardent pursuer of shalom and wholeness. Pursuing wholeness is what frontline nurses, doctors, and hospital staff have been doing every single day of this brutal pandemic. Pursuing wholeness is what so many of us have done when we have donated precious resources, our money, and our time, when we had the urge to keep more for ourselves. Pursuing wholeness is what so many in this congregation and our nation do in ways large and small. And friends, pursuing wholeness is what we must keep doing if we are to be the builders of a city, a state, and a nation that we can be proud of. A nation that takes care of each other, a nation that protects each other, and the laws and Constitution that we hold preciously dear. We know from the stories of our Torah, we know from the history of our people that this pursuit of wholeness is difficult. There are often demoralizing moments where we throw our hands in the air and say, just what is going on here? Where we say, we can't believe our children are subjective to what they're watching and what they're experiencing. Well, our tradition says, believe it. And now get to work, to doing your part in being a Rodef Shalom, to doing your part in making our world better and modeling and teaching our children how to do the same. This is the mission of the Israelites in the Torah. This is the mission of the Jewish people. This is our mission. This Shabbat, we begin a new book of the Torah. And seemingly at the same time, we are beginning a new book, a new chapter in our nation's history. Each of us as a Rodef Shalom, a pursuer of wholeness, is a co-author. Dear God, let the sentences we write in it be bold and be filled with blessing and mitzvot and with love. Amen.
Amen.